go to our last speaker for our speaking sessions before we have lunch at 12:30. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Laura Tensa, who graduated from Oregon State and is earned a master's from the University of Georgia. And she first worked in the turkey industry with experience in primary breeders through the processing plant in the Midwest and on the East Coast. And she recently moved to the Pacific Northwest, where she's working for a cage-free and free-range layer operation, and also pursuing a master's through the University of Edinburgh in animal welfare, ethics, and law. Let's welcome Dr. Tensa.
Hey, thank you for that. As Shauna said, I now live in the Pacific Northwest, where I get to say things like the mountain is out, and that just means that the sun is shining that day. So what I do now is completely different than my past, and I'm now working with free range and cage, all of it's cage-free, but free range and pasture layers. And so not only do I get to see the mountain every day, I get to see birds outside, just enjoying natural behaviors and interacting with their environment. And so my talk is really focusing on how do we take these welfare standards, welfare ideas, and actually translate them into practice. And so going through what is the minimum welfare standard? For a lot of people, it's just meeting that welfare audit. Do we meet the welfare audit? Did we pass it? Can we put that stamp on our label and just move on with our day? And for that, as has been said many times, you really need to know your audit tool. For meat birds, do you actually go out to your breeders and look at your breeders, or do you just focus on the meat bird portion from hatchery, grow out, load out, and processing plant? And then the layers, do you just look at the birds in production, or do you actually go out and look at the pullets with that welfare audit tool? In order to elevate welfare, we can also, what I like to do is, because I get to go to the same set of farmers every day, I like to build trust. And so the first thing that I do is I go out there, I introduce myself to the farmer, just look at their birds, look at their flock, build trust, wait for an opportunity. Usually they have something that they want to work on, something they want to do to improve. And so take that as a door to open in, get a small win under your belt, and then you can move on to the next step, which is actually improving something. And if that doesn't work, then you can always tie an aspect to production. If you can figure out a way to put the money behind it, that's where you really start getting attention. And so I know we all know the 5 domains. I know we've talked about it many times, but the reason that I'm going through it is that's kind of how my talk is set out today. And so go through each of the 5 domains, talk about a couple of the key welfare indexes, and then I'm going to talk about my experiences with each one. And so for the 5 domains, we have the survival critical domains of physical, environment, health, and nutrition. We have the situational domains, behavioral interactions. This is with the environment, other animals, and then ourselves as humans and caretakers. And then the affective state domain of the mental state of the animal. And as we've talked about with key welfare indicators, these are science-backed outcome measures, and they can be used to assess and improve animal welfare. And this is looking at foot pad lesions, lameness, and mortality rates, just as a couple things. And we can use these to measure our animal welfare outcomes. It gives us an actual number to put behind it. Guide improvements. Are we trending up? Are we trending down? Are we plateauing? It promotes a common language between the auditors, the certifying agents, and ourselves on the ground as farmers. And it allows us to track progress over time, as I said. And so now getting into the presentation. As we know with our background, scientific understanding, beliefs and opinions are not facts. We can't just go around stating our opinion and thinking that everybody will take it as it is. We need objective and empirical evidence, and correlation does not equal causation. And so where do I go to find this data? I've worked for a number of companies over the last few years, and everybody's starting to move towards electronic records. This means that I can be anywhere, pull up my computer and be able to access these records and look at them. I don't have to call the service tech, call the grower, go out to the farm, take a picture of the mortality card. It's at my fingertips, and with it being at my fingertips, it's a lot easier to manipulate. I don't have to spend hundreds of hours entering it into an Excel sheet or other database. So I've used mortality records, prescriptions, hatch and placement records, egg production records. At the plant, you can look at DOA, bruising, broken bones, and these are numbers that are already gathered. We already have to do it, so let's take it and do something more with it. If I ask someone, hey, would you go out and start doing this for me? There's going to be pushback. They're not going to see the value of it, and data will be missing. You won't get that complete data set, or I'll spend hundreds of hours myself trying to go out and collect that data. So I like to use data that's already there. So going through the first of the domains, the physical environment, these are factors that enable comfort through appropriate temperature, substrate, space, air, odor, noise, and predictability. So these can include things like our ability to heat and cool the barn, what our litter source is, what the density of birds are, and then the litter quality or the air quality. So in air quality, I like to look at things like ammonia. Do we have a high level of ammonia, or is it an undetectable number? What's our dust? Do we have high dust in the barn, or is it a very clean environment? What's our humidity in the barn? I now get to say that I live in a place that humidity just means that it's raining, and I don't have to deal with outside humidity anymore. And then also looking at carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. So for my first case example, it was a couple of flocks. We started seeing some unevenness, higher mortality into these 2 to 4 week old flocks. And when we posted these birds, the only consistent lesion that we saw was round heart in these stunted birds. And in this picture, you can see we've got a normal heart next to the round heart. And so cause, in my experience, this is high CO2, and this can be anywhere from the hatchery, the transportation truck, or the barn itself. And so with turkeys, we have sibling flocks. The hens go to one farm, the toms go to another farm, and so you can easily look, is the sibling flock affected, or is it just this barn? And what I found is it occurs more commonly in the winter in my older barns that either didn't have a great ventilation system or were poorly insulated. And so they were constantly cranking the heat and constantly cutting back on the fan movement. And so we just got a buildup of CO2 in the barn. The next one is another case study. This was pre-AMPV, and so I know they didn't have pneumo. It's a farm, respiratory disease, very unresponsive to medication. The farm was relatively isolated, rarely treated, and it's a curtain-sided barn up in the mountain. This is actually a picture of the barn on the day that I went out to it. And of course, it was a late Friday that I got called to see what we could do because the weekend was coming up. Walked into the barn and instantly started crying. I didn't have an ammonia meter with me, but there was that much ammonia that I walked in, started crying and said, you know, I have to get out of here. I just can't be in here. And that shifted our conversation from what should we do about this flock? We need to treat this flock, to how can we improve the air quality? Because if we improve the air quality and manage the ammonia, then the flock will do a lot better. And so, like I said, it's curtain-sided barn. They have no exhaust fans, and so we're limited on what we can do. But other things we could do to manage ammonia in that flock and flocks going forward is downtime. Make sure we have enough downtime to adequately prep and turn our litter. When we do litter prep, what do we do? Do we just move the birds out and move the next flock in? Do we cake it out? Do we till it? Do we windrow? What do we actually do to manage the litter? What is our litter moisture? We've all heard you can go down, take a scoop of litter, and you want to squeeze it and not have a bunch of water drip out. Do we have high moisture levels in this? What is our litter treatment? Are you applying it correctly? We were using one litter treatment for ammonia that it turns out it pulls all of the water out, and so you get a really humid barn, and they actually say you need to run your exhaust fans in order to exhaust it out. Well, we didn't have any exhaust fans to run, and so all of that moisture from our litter was just sitting there in the air. And then managing ventilation. Make sure you have, if you don't know yourself, make sure your service techs know how to manage the ventilation in all of the different style of barns that you're running. Moving on to the next category is health. These are factors that promote good health through a good fitness level and absence of disease and injury. And so a few things to look at would be your vaccination program, outdoor access, are you letting the birds outside, water sanitation, breeder health, and then injuries. And so where do I go to get this data? Again, mortality cards. I can look at 7-day mortality. Again, like I said, I now have cloud-based mortality tracking. I can look at prescriptions. I can look at keelbone assessments on my laying hens. I can pull data from the processing plant, and then again, serological monitoring on the farms. So looking at vaccination, I like to run as minimum of a vaccine program as I can. I don't like to add in a lot of other things, but here's just a few questions that you can ask yourself as you're designing or inheriting a vaccine program. The first one, is it effective? And how do you define effectiveness? And are you actually monitoring anything that you're vaccinating for or that's in your vaccine program? Are you vaccinating for the right diseases? Do you vaccinate for a disease that's in your area? For example, when I inherited my previous vaccine program, we were vaccinating for Newcastle. And after about 1.5 years of pulling titers, I had never seen a case of Newcastle in any of my flocks. So I went, why are we even vaccinating for this? What is it doing for us? How is it helping? Are you seeing repeated challenges with what you're vaccinating for? Cole just gave a great talk of AMPV and what we're learning and trying to do with that. But are you seeing other challenges with your vaccines? And is your vaccine actually causing the challenge? With one of my previous companies, we were vaccinating with a live cholera vaccine in our turkey breeders. And funny story, that turkey breeder flock that we were vaccinating was always getting live cholera. They were always getting 3x4, which, as you can imagine, is what we're vaccinating for. So did a little bit of an investigation, and it turns out every flock we were moving unvaccinated birds in and mixing them with our vaccinated birds. And that's why we were getting this challenge and losing birds due to cholera every flock. So we stopped that, and we stopped seeing cholera. And then flock mortality, just looking at disease concerns. Right now on the layer side, I'm worried about E. coli and spotty liver. On the turkey side, Rio, cellulitis, blackhead, which has no legal treatment. AMPV were my big concerns, and then always we're worried about hypothii. I deal a lot with piling now, and with my outdoor access birds, a lot of predation as well. And then we can also look at the mortality timing. Are we talking about mortality in that first 7 days? Are we talking about mortality in the middle of the flock, or are we talking about mortality at the end of the flock? And this can help drive you, what are our actual challenges and complex challenges? So just going through a few pictures because it's before lunch and we all need pictures. This is looking at Rio. So this is Rio in light hens. And you can see the swelling of the bird, the swelling of the tendons, and then as you open it and dissect it out, you can see those ruptured tendons and the blood clots associated with them. And in addition to Rio, you also have other leg deformities, and these actively affect your lameness scores and your key welfare indices if you have disease or other nutritional deficiencies causing leg deformities. Blackhead is a disease that I struggled with. We had a lot of neighbors. We were in a very dense area of production in the Shenandoah Valley. And so blackhead every summer, starting about August through about October, we had blackhead. This is another one of those diseases. I graduated right as they pulled the approval for the last blackhead treatment. And so I've never been able to treat for it. And so all we can do is use management. We would acidify the litter, we would cull out, we would diagnose it as soon as possible. And so if you were a farm that had repeat blackhead every year, we would go through and we would actually just post mortality every day, because the sooner we could identify it, the better the flock outcome was. And these are some more pictures of blackhead, because it can present a little bit differently depending on the age of the birds. Cole, again, gave a great presentation on AMPV out in Virginia. I dealt with a type B, and as we said out there, B is bad and A is awful. So we'd rather deal with a B. That being said, my worst flock, we sold about 34% made it to the plant. I left right as we were getting the vaccine, so I don't have any experience with vaccine, but we made it through 2 winters and a summer with just managing alone, and we went through a lot of the same things that Cole talked about. Water sanitation was critical in turkey production, especially where I was located. We had a lot of Mennonite farms, which meant that they all had dairies. And they decided to all save a little bit of money. So they put their well in the heifer field, and then they put the drinker next to the wellhead, because then you have to run less pipe. And so you can see in this picture, behind one of the girls' legs is the wellhead. And so, as you can imagine, this well was contaminated. We got about 260 mpn per 100 mil of coliforms and about 6 of E. coli. And so we talked and worked with this grower, and we just moved where that drinker was, and all of a sudden his well cleaned up. He still had an issue when it rained heavily, just that runoff, but for the most part, it was a much better solution than what he had been dealing with. This is another well that I had, same area. The grower really liked to hear his medicator clicking, and because we didn't just give out antibiotics willy-nilly, he'd run all sorts of products through this medicator. Every time he ran products, his free chlorine would drop, and then he'd get respiratory disease. And it took us a little while to figure out, and we went, let's test your water, see what's going on there. And we actually got a number on this of 2,419 colony forming units of coliforms per 100 mils, as well as E. coli and enterococci. And then we had another farm that we actually maxed this one out. We had over 2,419 colony forming units per 100 mil of Pseudomonas. So this one, he had a couple cisterns, and so we ended up chlorinating as he went into the cisterns to allow the chlorine time to react and settle out and kill that. And then we chlorinated again going into the barn. So the only way we could deal with this water situation was double chlorination. But his health improved, and so there was that payback for him. Moving on to layers, one of the big things that we look at here is feather condition, feather abnormalities. And when a bird loses their feathers, goes through a partial molt, there's a lot of factors. We have stress, genetics, age of the bird. The older the bird is, the further they're into their lay cycle, the fewer feathers they have. Disease can do this, as well as parasite load. If they have a high parasite load, they'll have fewer feathers. And being organic production, we can't deworm. And then dietary deficiencies. And this is just an example from RSPCA of the feather scoring of these birds. And every audit system has a slightly different score. Some of them look at neck, back, wings, and vent areas separately, and others combine them. And then for layers, another important one is keelbone fractures and keelbone deviations. And a lot of these are as the birds jump off of a perch or an aviary system and impact the ground, or with the design of your perch, sometimes just roosting for a long period of time can slowly deviate that keel. And so we rely heavily on pullet training. We want to train the birds in the pullet barn to be able to navigate these systems and make sure that in the lay barn they're going to is similar enough design to the pullet barn that they came from. We want to look at the design of the aviary system. Do they have ramps? What is the distance to the levels? What are the angles to the perches and the angles of the jumps to help them navigate up and down? What are the breeds of the birds? Brown birds are just less athletic and bigger than a white bird. What is the age of your birds? Are they a young flock? Are they small, or are they at the end of their life? And then use of ramps. I've found ramps, just adding ramps really helps the birds go up and down. They really like the ramps, and you'll see them. You'll always see birds on our ramps. Outdoor access. This is new to me with my new job, but it allows birds to have access to the outdoors, explore out of their enrichments, natural behaviors. And as our pop-up doors open up in the morning, we just see a rush of birds heading outside. However, we do have a higher disease challenge with this, spotty liver, cholera, exposure to high path, nothing like putting outdoor birds with wild geese migrating overhead. And then the one that I wasn't expecting was predation. Our biggest challenge is actually bald eagles. And there's nothing you can do about bald eagles except wait for the salmon to run. And for other key welfare indicators, this is going back to meat birds, looking at injury tracking. I like to do a lot of this work at the processing plant, and so I spent a ton of time just at our processing plant. We already collected this data. I could go in and I could see it firsthand. We had wing injuries, leg injuries, just any sort of injury. We had DOAs and we could assign bruising based on transportation. We could look at shackling, stunning, and slaughter at the processing plant, as well as get that information. This picture came from one of my neighbors. Those are broilers. The high for that day was about 26 degrees and the low was about 9. And this is talking in Fahrenheit. And here they are with nothing to protect them. But so I don't know what that flock ended up doing at the plant with transportation in those temperatures, but one of the main measures is DOAs. We tended to see that our large birds, so market toms, had more of the problems in the heat, whereas our small birds, our light hens, had more problems in the cold weather, especially as you're transporting over long distances. There's some different ways to cool. You can add fans, you can add misters, you can keep that truck driving around, and also look at your coop density, put fewer birds in as your heat index rises. And then to keep warm, again, looking at that coop density, put more birds in as the temperature lowers. You can add panels. You can look at your distance to plant and the weather. Is there rain, sleet, snow in the forecast? And a minimum weight of the bird. Don't transport a bird that's a little bit too light. Processing plant, like I said, Condom is one of my favorite places to look. It gives you a lot of data about what that flock actually looked like in the field. Grade, it's used to track carcass blemishes, and oftentimes these are strongly correlated with welfare. Bruises, broken bones, scratches, and footpad scores. You can also look at your feed withdrawal in the plant. Do you have a nice yellow gizzard, or is it completely green, indicating that the birds have been off feed for a longer time? So whole bird condemn, like I said, this data is being used already. We can look at septox, air sacculitis, and AMPV caused both of these to rise. And so we now see that seasonal trend of in the winter, we see a lot more, and in the summer, we see less. You can look at cadavers as well as inflammatory process as well. And then again, I have some pictures going through of air sacculitis and some septox, as well as showing some pecking and scratching on the birds. And then one of the things that we saw a lot was breast blisters and breast buttons. And these, if I see a lot of these, I start thinking, what is the litter condition on the farm? What is the leg condition? Are they a flock that has a lot of Rio or angular limbs? Are they spending a lot of time on the litter? And what is the breed? There's one breed that has more of a tendency towards this than others. Looking at parts condemn, we've got hemorrhage, bruising, the fractures, swelling, and like I said, breast buttons that get cut off. This is one of my favorite charts from a study done in the 60s. They went through, and it wouldn't be allowed to do today, but they actually caused a bruise and then looked at the time it took for that bruise to heal. And so we can see that it went from red and then started moving towards that dark purple to light green before yellow, and it finally healed. And so based on this information, we can assign which group was responsible or had an impact in that and really work with that group to reduce the injuries. And so looking at these, it's a fresh bruise, it's a fresh wing break, and so transportation. And so with this data, just by showing up to the plant and looking at the carcasses, I know that I now need to go look at transportation live haul and see how they're loading birds. We did a lot of manual loading, and so somebody is touching every single bird that got loaded into a trailer. And so seeing this, I go out and watch live haul. Seeing this, the one on the right is green, grow out. And so now I need to go to that farm, figure out what's happening. Are they piling birds? Is it just a one-off? Are they moving through the birds too quickly? Are they taking their time and walking? Did they have a piling incident? But by having a lot of green, then I know where to go. The other one is wing coop discoloration, and we tend to see that in hens as they ride along over a long distance, their wings will go up. And so I can look at the distance being hauled as well as the truck driver. Is there one that's being a little bit too rough, speeding up really quickly, slamming on their brakes and taking turns too fast? Going back to the 5 domains, the next one is nutrition. And these are access to the animal's ability to have good quality water and eat an appropriate diet. And so one of the things that we need to remember to think about is the water lines. Did we actually go in and clean them, or do we have a nice biofilm deposit growing on them? And then, like I said, in Virginia, we looked a lot at water, and some of it was this rust color. We had really high iron deposits. Water should not be brown as you're drinking it. And what we found is that we'd have these big bubbas on farms, and we had some farms that had to go through and clean out their big bubba filter twice a day or twice a week, just to try to get good flow continuously to the birds. And so on these farms, we actually had to go in and install an iron specific filter just to get the iron out. I had another farm that we hadn't installed an iron filter in, brand new barn. We were just getting into it. After 5 flocks, they had to replace all of their nipple lines because they had that much iron in their water and it just destroyed them. So it's a good idea to go through and look at your water quality as you're looking to build a new barn. This next case is really interesting. You might think, what are these? These are the nipples. And so in turkeys, we use a nipple drinker with a pendulum on it to give our birds water. And you might think, what's that material? We thought the same thing for many years. This farm went from bells to nipples, and they started seeing some of these either clog up with this hard material, and then we switched water sanitation, and every single nipple in the house clogged up, and we went, well, we can't do that again. Birds need to have water. This was really hard. You couldn't dissolve it off of anything. You couldn't just flake it off with your hand. You couldn't use any chemical to clean it. You could clean it with a wire brush. And so our grower would spend hours just cleaning these with a wire brush because they were still good. We eventually sent in some of the mineral buildup instead of sending in a water sample because that didn't tell us anything. We sent in just the mineral buildup and got barium sulfate out of it. I still don't have an answer as to why they have barium in their water. I don't have an answer for what we're doing. The grower's happy now that he knows it, but I can't guarantee to that grower that any water treatment that we'll put in will be effective at cleaning it out and won't get clogged itself. Going to the next of the 5 domains, behavioral interactions. These are factors that provide interactions with the environment, novel challenges, enrichments. And these can include things such as design of barn, enrichment objects, peck stones, hay. And like Kate was saying, the birds will tell you what they want. They'll tell you if they're happy. One of my favorite things about being in a turkey barn is that all of the turkeys will follow you. They'll popcorn up, they'll follow, they'll come running. And so this is just a video sitting at the end of the barn of those birds just coming and following and just seeing what you're doing. And this is another one, just walking down the house, and you have that wedding procession following you, with every bird wanting to see what you're doing. And then, as we all know, birds will tell you exactly what they need. They'll tell you when they're too cold. They'll all sit under the stove. They'll tell you when they're feeling pretty good, and they'll tell you when it's too hot and they don't want to be under that direct heat source. And then just looking at some different enrichments in the different species that I've worked with. Every species is different. What works in a broiler isn't going to work in a turkey, and it isn't necessarily going to work in a layer. So layers really like their perch pipes. They really like to be up and roost. We'll find them in the rafters pretty frequently. They like their peck stones. We use a lot of hay bales, ramps, just different designs of aviary systems and blinds so that they have access to get away from other birds. Turkeys, we used a lot of peck stones, hay bales, and then we'd throw toys into the barns. What's also great about turkey behavior is they're gonna tell you when something's different. And so we put peck stones in this barn for the first time, and no turkey wanted to get close. They all said, hey, how about you go figure out what that is? But once they realized what it is, they'd use them. These are just hay bales in a layer barn. And then this barn, I had a grower who was interested in welfare, interested in providing enrichments. And so she said, what if we use some children's toys? They interact, the birds won't be able to eat them, and we'll see what they do. And so as you walked up, you could actually hear the birds playing the tambourine. And this was one, it was interactive enough that the birds never lost interest through the flock. You'd always hear it every time you walked up to the barn. Like I said, your barn design can play a role in it. State and market laws, many states, including the states that I live in, have banned cages, either enriched or colony or your battery cages. And so we have to do a free design aviary type or slat system. Your bird type plays a role in this. Brown birds are less athletic and bigger. And then the breed, there are some breed differences in how well they want to interact and move through their environment. Looking at the last of the 5 domains, the mental state, the first 4 factors will positively or negatively affect the state of the animal. And so some of the abnormal behaviors that we look for and look at would be aggression, feather pecking, cannibalism, and this can play a role in your cages, your housing conditions, your light intensity if you have a nutritional deficiency, and then piling in the birds. And we're starting to see some shifting mentalities. Just because it's always been done one way doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement and doesn't mean that we shouldn't try something else. We can look at our lighting, the intensity, duration, and light color. We can look at our barn design. How do we have the birds interacting and moving through their environment? We can look through the enrichment options, access to outdoors, and the pros and cons of that. We can look at the bird treatments. Are we beak treating? Are we toe treating? Why are we doing this? Let's challenge status quo. And then what do we do about male chicks in the layer industry? And with that, I think I have time for questions.
How many do the eagles take away?
They'll take a couple hundred over the course of the summer.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's why we have dogs, is they'll actually scare the eagles away.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question about transportation. Also, even manipulation, you can evaluate between transportation with likes and without likes. You know, dark side is less stress for turkey, for chicken.
Yeah, so turkeys do load out differently than broilers do. And so we actually have to walk all of our birds up to be loaded out on the truck. And so we can't have the barn too dark, otherwise they'll just lie down and go to bed. So we do need a minimum light intensity in order to get them to walk up to be loaded.
So if you do animal welfare auditing or assessments, do you lump in your organic requirements that go along with that so that you have a single audit that you can do, or do you have separate assessments to keep those expectations
Yeah.
segregated?
Yeah, ideally, I'd like to move towards having one audit, but right now we have multiple audits for all of the different requirements.
So I was peeking at Rosie's notes, and we have a proposition to market the tambourine.
Yeah. You can also use a xylophone.
Oh, nice. Yeah. You have like a little family get together. But in seriousness, what do you think? What do you think the best approach to working with turkey growers in terms of putting an enrichment in? You know, do you just kind of let them put their kids' toys in there, or how does that work?
Yeah, so that depended on the farmer and what they were interested in. Some of them, like that one, was really interested in going above and beyond and what else can she do, what else can she add. So I met her right where she was at and said, let's try this, let's do that. There's other ones that think that that's just more work. We haven't done it that way for 50 years. Why would we change and do it now? And with those ones, I would work more with them on building trust of like, let's build our relationship. Let's talk about anything that we can. Let's find some common ground. And then when you have an opportunity that I can help you with, let's work together and do that and get that win. And then start saying, hey, I'm seeing some pecking. Would you be interested in using a peck stone or in running this? And then you can kind of tie it to a problem they have and offering a solution. And then they also see some of that financial benefit.
All right, thank you. Do you have any other questions? All right, since I stole your break, we can end a bit early. Let's thank Dr. Tensa.